Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And with me today, we have Brian Turk and Brenda Laughlin, who are managing partners at Enavrio, which is an HR consulting network. And we have a very interesting topic today around selecting technology for HR. But welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. Maybe share with our audience just a little bit around what Enavrio does, because I think that will kind of set the stage for what we'll be talking about today.
Sure, Brent. Thank you for having us. Enavrio is a global consulting collective of the best and brightest HR and HR technology consultants. We work with independent contractors and freelancers and also boutique consulting firms. And we work with end clients, we work with vendors, and we work with larger consulting firms.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, and we've had a lot of conversations in the past offline around what Enavrio does, and I'm really impressed with your work. And Brenda, we've had you on the podcast before, and it was a great episode, and we'll link to it when we make this one live. The topic today is this: is it really just vendor selection? And this topic sort of sprang to mind, sprang. Sorry, when we met up in the hallway at HR Technology Conference about 6 weeks ago now, I guess, maybe 7. And it just kind of struck me, just what is entailed in this. Is it just about the technology, or is there more involved? And we got to talking about it, and we thought, hey, maybe this is worth a podcast episode. And maybe we could start here. We hear a lot about, digital transformation or HR transformation. And, I've spoken to lots of people out in the wild, and they say, oh, digital transformation comes first, then HR transformation. And others say, no, it's HR transformation that comes first, then digital transformation. I thought, okay, what is this chicken and the egg question? Is it rigidly just one way, like the use of the Oxford comma, or do we have some leeway? What comes first, or does it depend?
I'll take that one. I think it depends. And ideally, they actually are happening somewhat in parallel when you look at it from a big scale. Ideally, we have the HR strategy somewhat formulated. We know what the business is trying to accomplish and how the HR strategy is linked to the business objectives. And we know what we're headed towards or what problems we're trying to solve. But ideally, they're happening in parallel. Today, technology is just an integral part of almost every strategy, every piece of HR. And to ignore the technology piece and have it as an afterthought is a mistake. To lead with the technology is a mistake, because oftentimes technology doesn't even solve the problem. So ideally, they're happening at the same time. We're figuring out what problems we need to solve, what strategies we need to align with. We're putting plans in place, and the technology piece of it is integrated into it at the same time.
Yeah, super interesting. Super interesting. You mentioned that sometimes technology doesn't even solve the problem. Not to put you on the spot, but do you have any maybe a war story around that? Something sort of an interesting story that kind of exemplifies that?
Sure. I mean, we're working with a client, and now we're working with a client right now. Great client. But right away they want to put in a performance management process, and they're a more of a startup company with incredible vision and an incredible mission, but a performance management process really isn't going to. Our performance management system is probably not going to solve the problem. Really, it comes down to, hey, what's everybody's job? What's their roles? Who's gonna what? Really, it's a lot around the role clarity around versus the system. And we have this over and over again where companies will decide to implement a system and they don't even know what they're really trying to solve for, or they haven't backed up and said, what is it that we're trying to actually accomplish? And is this going to solve it? Sometimes it's the easy way or the fad, that drives them to a system. But many times it's not the answer, or it's only a piece of the answer. So
that's a super important point. And it gets down to this idea of also a little bit of a tangent, but we're not solving for the discrete silos of talent management anymore, right? If you're a vendor, and it strikes me that maybe the vendors play a role in this sometimes, is that they will see a prospect or somebody that's asking, hey, I have this problem, and okay, I have a performance management solution for you, or I have a succession planning solution for you. And that's not the way to look at it. You need to kind of look deeper and just understand that it all blends today.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome.
What does Enavrio look for in its clients before beginning vendor selection? How do you start? Like, once you've kind of figured out, maybe skipping a step here, but we'll get back to it. But when does Enavrio kind of say, okay, we're ready now to look for a vendor to help you kind of figure this out?
Yeah, Brian, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Yeah, and sometimes it starts by them saying we're ready to find a new vendor and we want help with it. And then we have to sort of calibrate, where are you really in the process, to your first question, which comes first, right? But in terms of the bigger picture, working with clients, we look at what are the business drivers here? What is the business need? Does the business need lead us to a system solution, or does it lead us first to thinking through your process, or backing up, thinking through your strategy, turning that into process and program, then turning that into business requirements, then turning that into technical needs, which can then inform what's the right system. If we're kind of, picking up on Brenda's point about, let's look at kind of the process here. We want to know what the business needs first, and that need may not be a new system. They may know they have a problem. They may know they need a solution to that problem, and vendors oftentimes lead with what they are as a solution. But really, we want to make sure that we're digging a few levels deeper than that surface level problem to solution, and making sure that we're matching the root cause to the actual technical capabilities that a system can bring. And yeah, sometimes that doesn't mean that we're quite ready to pick a new system as of yet.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do you think vendors are in general, in terms of grasping this, and maybe taking a more consultative approach when they're in their first conversations, and as they grow their interactions with prospects, for instance? Do you see them sort of understanding this and starting to take a more consultative approach, or there standouts? We don't have to name vendors, but are there some out there that are really kind of getting it? But is it mostly that they're kind of behind? Is this a big area in need of improvement for the vendor side of things?
I don't know that I would say it's an area of improvement. If we look up the objective of the vendor, their objective is to sell their product. And so their salespeople come in with a very consultative approach and oftentimes make other suggestions. But I think ideally their goal is to sell the product, right? So they're going to try to figure out how to convince you that their system is the solution. So that's one of the great things about having a more of a neutral third party to help you through the selection process, is that you can have somebody who can, kind of an outside party that can say, hey, wait a sec. Let's dig a little deeper into what they're saying is your solution or your problem, and kind of help to facilitate that, I think.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm glad you kind of clarified that. I'm curious in terms of the employers that need something HR related to figure out something strategically, and then eventually incorporate the technology. Where what is it like when they approach you, for instance? What kind of a like, what is their state of being? Is it where are they? Is sort of like a typical, or is it across the board, or what? And maybe what's the ideal state of their being when they kind of like first engage with folks like you?
Yeah, Brian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I can certainly speak to the ideal. I don't know if the ideal matches reality most of the time, but I think the ideal is that it's a natural evolution of where they are as a company and as an HR function within that company, where maybe they've outgrown the vendor that they're with currently, or they've had some course of business that's changed their requirements where their current solution doesn't squarely fit with those requirements any longer, and it's time to move on to something new. Now, that something new may still be with the same vendor, just a different product within that vendor's umbrella. For example, maybe they're moving from on-premise to cloud, for example, or they have a small to mid version and they're ready for enterprise. Could be something like that, but at the same time, you still may be looking at some outside vendors. But I think that's the natural sort of organic culmination of a vendor selection. Oftentimes it's a little more reactive than that in reality, but I think that's the way that it should work if everything's aligning the way we want it to.
And what we often find is that there's this saying, like, the worst software is the one that you have now, and the best one is the one you're going to. That's really, really not the case. We find a lot of vendors or a lot of customers who are just complaining about their current vendor. So many issues, so many problems. And when we work with a client, a lot of times we find that it's really not the vendor that it's the problem. It's how you set it up. It's how you've grown and changed and not adjusted your system in the meantime. All systems have some challenges, and no system is perfect. So we try to help the client actually figure out, do they actually need to move to a new system? Or is it that we just need to go in and figure out what are really the pain points and the things that aren't working and fix that? And that can save them a ton of money and a ton of time and a change management. There are times where you have to move, right? Because the vendor is obsoleting the product, or, but many, many times it's just like, oh, we're up for renewal and we hate our system. Let's go out to bid for a new one. And that's often not the right answer.
Yeah, that what you said, that the worst vendor is the one you have and the best one is the one you want. That holds true for lots of things in life. It's kind of, I couldn't help but chuckle inside when you said that, because it is kind of like a perception thing.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a situation where you really just helped the client just re-implement the existing solution because well, I have a little story to share, but I don't want to, any situations like that?
Oh yeah,
Well,
all the time.
yeah, of course. I mean, and there are different ways that this can come about, but oftentimes, clients have awareness that maybe they didn't knock it out of the park on their initial implementation of a new product, right? Or even if it's not a new product, but they've had it around several years, they know that there are capabilities that their system has that they have not unlocked, or that there's something they're not quite doing right. Sometimes they don't have that awareness. So, I did work with an enterprise consumer products company that was in that bucket of, we have these 5 or 6 pain points that our system just isn't delivering what we want it to. And we really need to look at other potential solutions out there. Now, at the size that they are, you can narrow down the competitors to a fairly small list in terms of complexity and capability, and it's a fairly major decision to change from one platform to another at that size. And so we took a very close examination of what they were doing in their processes, a very close look at the system's capabilities, thinking outside of the box a little bit, both on how they were conducting their processes, how they were articulating their requirements, and then some of the functionality in the system where there were some configuration options that aren't necessarily commonly used, but they're available and maybe just not well publicized or well discussed. And we were able to address those 5 or 6 pain points for the most part, not 100%, but no system's going to address what you're looking for as a business 100% of the time. So it is definitely possible.
That's super interesting. It's almost like conducting discovery for them. Helping, yeah,
Yep.
helping them figure. Yeah, yeah. I have a somebody that I spoke with in a previous life, and spoke with more recently in terms of HR space, and there, this absolutely happens all the time, and it can be kind of bad where the solution in this case, I won't name the vendor obviously or the user, but it's a very well known end-to-end HCM suite, and it was and it's known for being sort of streamlined and clean, right? And it just was implemented wrong. It was implemented entirely wrong, and it's got this point where the perception is on the user side that whenever something goes wrong, oh, that's solution XYZ again, just not working. And it's the person that works there now that I know, who's in HR leadership. He happens to have used that same system elsewhere and loves it because he knows what it's capable of doing. And so, there's these situations where you just go in and you just wonder, how did that happen? And I'm just, not because, the vendors have so much to do. They have a lot on their plate, and this is not a knock against any one vendor. It's more of a sort of an industry challenge. But I just, I just think that there's a something that happens between the close of the sale when it's handed off to the implementation team, and then eventually to customer success, or maybe that's concurrent, I don't know, where things kind of fall apart often.
They do. They do. I think what happens oftentimes is customers purchase a system. Sometimes they just don't understand what it entails to actually set up the system from an internal capability, the decisions they're going to have to make, how they're going to make them, how they're actually going to do that. A lot of times they just haven't really thought through who they put in charge of making those decisions. They haven't tested, they haven't there's a lot to the process. And so just being ready as a customer is a big piece of it. And then it depends on who you select as a partner and who you have, or the vendor themselves, if they're doing the implementation, what the knowledge is of the person that you're working with, and how, what the consultant or the consulting team that you're working with, how they can facilitate you through those decisions and help you as a customer set that up. It's much harder than a lot of customers go into, into what this takes to actually set all that up. So
yeah, totally.
no one person is to blame. The vendor's not to blame, the partner's not to blame, the company's not to blame. It's a combination of all of them, and it to get it right is a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I know of one vendor where, and having been on the vendor side myself, I know that, and this is not the vendor I'm talking about. People look at my professional bio and say, "Oh, he's talking about." That's not what I'm talking about. But I, there's often sort of a lot of the vendors, I think and I heard somebody put it this way: we're not expecting salespeople to act like anything else than salespeople. And what that means is, there's often kind of like a form that the salesperson will be expected to fill out at the close of the deal, so that the next team, when they hand off, they have all the information they need to a good implementation, do it as it was sold to them, so it reflects, their impression of the system and all this. And and the completion rates on those can be quite atrocious, because that's not what salespeople do, is fill out forms. when when it's closed, the deal is done, they're on to the next one. And so I know of one vendor where they don't expect the salespeople to be anything other than salespeople. Instead, they have like a forensics team because
Oh,
like they have like in their customer success um group, they have, they have like a forensic team that goes in there and actually interviews the salesperson, like, so they just, and they kind of go in there and figure out everything. And so they are, it's a little bit extra, labor expenditure, frankly, but it really pays off, because those implementations end up going as, not all the time, there's still problems, but much higher rate of success for those implementations, in terms of reflecting what the expectations were when the prospect signed on the dotted line, became a customer.
I
that's an
do love
interesting.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I do love that concept. I think it is a little bit risky to completely rely on the vendor to carry forward
Mm.
what your needs are from sales to implementation. Ideally, you have some way of owning that as the client and seeing it through as the client without things getting lost in translation. We do look at ways for how can we have a through line working with clients from that initial kind of HCM strategy visioning to business needs to technical specifications and selecting a vendor to actually configuring and implementing with that vendor. And when you're doing the selection, it takes the form of let's make sure everyone's on the same page regarding what the functionality needs to be to specifics, and make sure everyone's really aligned. And when everyone's not really aligned, that we're able to prioritize and collectively agree on what our needs are, first and foremost. There are tools out there. One that we partner with is called Olive, and that facilitates that process of collaborating across stakeholder teams within an organization. And then it helps carry that through line forward. And you can have vendors essentially fill out their responses to each of these requirements. And of course, we all do this with, RFPs, and we have spreadsheets, and I've seen a million different ways of doing it, but it can get really messy and it can get lost along the way. So something like this, that's a sort of a centralized, standard, consistent way of tracking that
Mm-hmm.
sales process through even implementation and testing, even through training. So you can say, here's what the seed of this requirement was. And now we're actually testing a configured system to make sure that we delivered on that promise case by case. And that's where I think, again, if you can do that as a customer, then you have ownership of the process in that way.
Yeah, that's huge. And and because a lot of customers, not all the time, but often it's their first time around the rodeo when it
Yeah.
comes to selecting a solution and then implementing it and everything. And and if you don't want to be wet behind the ears when you're or think things will go wrong, that didn't have to go wrong. And it drastically increases the chances of of having sort of a botched implementation, or something that's suboptimal compared to what you were promised and envisioned and expected, and were reasonable in expecting.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the thought around, how do you find, where are they when they first engage with you? It sounds to me like sort of disruption or friction sort of prompts them to reach out to folks like you. And hopefully it's you guys, because you're the best, obviously.
Yes.
Yeah. But there's, it just makes me wonder if we're ever going to get to a point where people, this is sort of the proverbial thing, are people ever going to get more reactive, proactive, as a matter of course? Will that become the norm? And I don't know, maybe we'll get there sometime, but any thoughts around that? Just sort of this, it seems to be very reactive when they reach out to folks like you, and that makes sense. But any thoughts?
Yeah. Our hope is that our goal, ideally, we're engaged with a client from a long-term partnership, where we're continually working with, we have consultants with all sorts of different domain expertise, and we can help them with the maintenance, you know, the kind of their continuous ongoing needs.
Mm.
And so then, you know, if we're proactively looking at what's going on, and that it just goes a lot better. And so for any client out there, wherever they can have sort of a proactive view, have a partnership with a consulting network, with other, I think that's gonna help you in the long run. So many times it's like all the needs just stack up,
Yeah.
and they just stack up, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, Brian said this earlier, like we just want to reinvent the whole HR function,
Yeah.
right? And we shouldn't have to do that, right? It should be sort of an ongoing transformation with a continuous improvement where, yeah, we're going to have some major changes that come along, but if we're continuously working on it, it shouldn't be like, you know, it shouldn't be like, hey, you know, I've eaten like a pig for all this time and I now have 100 pounds to lose, right? We should be exercising every day and making those small improvements, taking our vitamins. And so then, yeah, we might get a little chubby over the holiday season, but it's not like a major transformation that has to happen. And I think ideally that's how we would look at our HR strategy, our systems and so forth. And so, yeah, we love it when we can have those long-term partnerships. Brian, do you have anything to add?
I think so. I think I'm thinking through why is it that way oftentimes with clients? Why do they have this we only reach out when we're in enough pain that we're driven to do that?
Mm.
I think our engagement model is potentially a solve for maybe one of the root causes there. I think one of the root causes is if I'm a customer and I know that I'm going to have to, when I engage external consulting, it's going to be an engagement. It's going to be a commitment. It's going to be a commitment financially. It's going to be commitment of our time and resources. And we have to think it through really carefully and seriously because it's not going to be a small commitment. In order to get real expertise in the traditional consulting model, oftentimes we have to sign a fairly sizable contract and get ourselves locked in to do something with that effort and with that investment. And there isn't always enough pain to do that until there is. And the way that we work is more flexible and agile. We have a flexible and agile workforce. We work with people who want to do their best work and don't always do their best work engaged 40 hours a week for several weeks or months on end with one specific client. Sometimes it's a work-life thing. Sometimes it's kind of how they prefer to organize their own work. So we match what they want versus what customers want. Sometimes customers want something that isn't an all-in investment for the next 3, 6, 12 months. They maybe need some spot consulting, some advice, maybe just a few weeks, maybe just very specific technical problems that they're looking at. Maybe they want some strategy framing, but it doesn't need to be a big transformation that lasts over several years. And we can deliver on those without being too invasive because we have a model that adapts and flexes with the customer's need by way of how we engage our experts in our collective.
I'm really glad you brought that up because sometimes the need is this isn't the right word, not surface, but it's pinpointed. It's it's not necessarily a longitudinal need, right?
Sure.
And by the same token, what I'm hearing, or the other side of the coins, what I'm hearing is that, yeah, people will probably continue to come to you because the pain gets to a point where, okay, we need somebody. But then the idea is, okay, that's how you came to us, but now you can, if you want to or need to, be with us long term, so that the next time there's we can catch that pain before it becomes too painful, right? And it becomes, and I like your analogy with, sort of, maintaining a healthy weight. You're not going to just, fast for 2 weeks because you got way overweight. This is, it's a marathon, and the process for you guys is, it's iterative. That HR transformation should be iterative, and it should be managed, and at a pace that it should be kept at a pace that's manageable, right? So that's not, you're not going to transform like that. Voila, oh, we're transformed. That doesn't happen. It only happens in, cartoons.
Yeah.
Yeah, that, really good stuff. Really good stuff. And any sort of last thoughts to add here?
I keep going back to vendor selection absolutely has its place. It's not always the first right answer. And another quick story I can recall is when I was brought in to a client who was dissatisfied largely at the user level. Mm-hmm. And they were having frustrations with even just too many clicks to do this. I can't get this information to that information. They kind of had already made up their mind that they were going to switch vendors when I was brought in. Mm-hmm. I tried to convince them not to. Bigger picture, their customer success team had kind of burned some bridges, and the financials kind of didn't make sense. So, they were justified in the end in doing that. But if they were just looking at a features and functionality perspective, their problems were solvable, and we did solve them ended up being 18 months before they finally implemented a new system, which I also helped them with. But I mean, technically they could have kept their old one and been perfectly happy with it, all the other factors aside. So I just emphasize that if you're just looking at a vendor and hoping they're going to solve all your problems, then it's probably going to result in some disappointment. It needs to be dug into a little bit deeper before you get there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would just add that, sometimes vendor selection is the answer, right? You do need a system. Mm. And when you do need a system, you want a thoughtful process. You want a third party, if possible, to help navigate all of the different vendors out there, help you with knowing where the right research is. We love to plug some of our people into Brent's research, right? We love to plug them into other research that is out there on the different systems and how clients have used those systems and where the successes have been. And we love to use Olive, who is our automation tool, who can really, really help streamline the process and help as you go into implementation. So, if you're actually going to move forward with vendor selection and that's the right thing, then look and see there are ways to make it simpler. It doesn't have to be laborious. And I also love to say, like, when you go into it, make sure you don't have any regrets. And so, going through the process correctly can ensure you don't have regrets.
That's right. No regrets. I love that. I love that. Thank you so much to you both for joining us today. Really appreciate this. This has been a really interesting, I think, illuminating conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brent. We appreciate you having us on today.
Pleasure. Thank you.